Hey everyone, it's Miss Gubrood back with talking about more fractions. So our today's question, our essential question, how can I put fractions together to make a bigger fraction? Or how can I take away fractions or a fraction to make a smaller fraction? That's what we're thinking about today. So take out your notebook, write down our essential question, and come right back when that's written down, please. All right, so for today's lesson, you're going to need the sheet called Adding Fractions with Unlike Denominators. Look for the one that says unlike. Now, in math, remember, unlike doesn't mean the same thing in everyday life. In everyday life, like means you enjoy something, you think is great. Unlike means you're kind of different, you're not sure. In this particular case, or actually we would usually say dislike in our regular thing, if we didn't like something like, oh, I dislike pepperoni on my pizza or something, means you don't like it. In math, unlike means different. So the two denominators are different. So we are adding fractions with different numbers for the denominator. Now, it's important for us to have this paper open, so please either find it from your teacher or open it in Google Classroom and take a look at this first problem. It says 1/3 plus 1/4. Think back to our conversation yesterday. If we're adding 1/3 and 1/4, the only way we can do that is if the wholes are the same size. So I'm going to tip my thing down. So here I have two circles. In order for us to add or subtract these, we need to be talking about the same size whole. So the wholes are the same. The two circles are exactly the same size. One is cut into thirds, so that's the thirds. One is cut into 4 pieces, that's the fourths. We need to add 1/3 and 1/4 together. The trouble when we do that is we're not sure what to call it. You can see the pieces are not the same size. We can't call them thirds because that's not the size of a third. We can't call them fourths because that's not the size of a fourth. We can't call them sevenths. Some kids would say, oh, well, it's 4 and 3, we'll just call it sevenths. 4 plus 3 is 7. No, because that means it takes 7 to make up a circle. And certainly when we try to add these two together, it doesn't take 7 of these to make up the whole thing. We can see that that clearly wouldn't work. So we have to recut these pieces. Now, I could take a scissors and cut these pieces, but I tell you what, the school wouldn't be too happy with me because these are magnetic, they're kind of expensive pieces. So I can't actually physically recut them with a scissor, but what I can do is I also have circle that's divided into smaller sections so I can recut them sort of in my mind. This is where the least common multiple comes into play. So if we have 1/4 and 1/3, we're thinking, what number, if I multiplied 4 times 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7, etc., what number would I get that's the same number that if I did with the 3s, 3 times 1, 3 times 2, 3 times 3, 3 times 4, 3 times 5. What number would I get that's the same and that's the smallest, the least common multiple? So think in your mind and write right on your paper the multiples of 3 and multiples of 4 and find the smallest one. I'm going to do that on my board. You do it on your paper and come right back. All right, so take a look here. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18. Multiples are like skip counting. 4s, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. What are the smallest number that's the same? It's 12. So what that means is we need to recut these pieces so they become the same size so we can add them up. So we have to change these pieces into 12ths. So I happen to have pieces that match up. So there's my 12ths covering the 1/4. Here are my 12ths covering the 1/3. Now we have 1, 2, 3 12ths, 1, 2, 3, 4 12ths. So 3 12ths plus 4 12ths. And our new answer then is 7 12ths. Go ahead and write that right on your paper, please. 7 12ths. You might be saying, well, that's great, Miss Gubrud, but I don't happen to have all these things lying around that I can match them up. I need another way to be able to do that. And your answer is, you're absolutely right. So this time you need your white erase board and your white erase marker, or if you don't have it, you can do it in your notebook. If you'd rather just use pencil in your notebook, that's fine too. But please stop, pause, and grab that and come back for number 2. All right, so 3/8, we need to draw 3/8. So first of all, we have to draw something that's easy to draw, and I tell you what, start with rectangles. Circles are hard, especially if you get like something like sevenths. Even your teacher wouldn't use circles for sevenths. So if you're having a hard time getting started, start with rectangles, start with rectangles, start with rectangles. They're a lot easier. And let's talk about how to be able to divide them up easily. 8 is an even number, so I know that if I start with a rectangle and I cut an even number in half, the same number of pieces are going to be on both sides. So I just cut it in half, so now I know it's 4 and 4. Well, 4 is also an even number, so I know I can cut that in half. Now I know it's 2 and 2. Well, 2 is also an even number, so I cut it in half, cut it in half. I go back over here. Remember, I needed 4 pieces over here. Cut it in half, cut it in half, cut it in half. Now, it's not absolutely perfect, but it's pretty neat. And I didn't have to add any more links on the box, and I didn't have to do a bunch of erasing. So that's a good strategy for drawing. So I'm starting with 3/8. There's 1, 2, 3. Pause and do this along with me. Pause and make sure on your paper you've got a picture with a rectangle, just like I'm doing, showing 3/8. All right, now we need to add the 1/4. The trouble is we can't just color more in like we could if they were both eighths. Instead, we've got to start with another shape. And this is important. Our important conversation from yesterday and days past is that if we're adding these two, just like we did before, we know the whole thing has to be, it has to be the same size. So your box that you're drawing, your second box, has to be the same size. But this one, we're only cutting into fourths. So there I go. I cut it into fourths. And I'm coloring one of them, 1/4. All right. So now I have the problem, 3/8 plus 1/4. How am I going to solve this? Again, we're going to think about least common multiple. LCM, least common multiple. The least common multiple of 4, remember, we're going to skip count by 4. 4, 8, 12, 16, etc. The least common multiple of 8, we're going to skip counting by 8s. 8, 16. Now, some of you might be like, oh, I see it already. And you do. 8 is the smallest number that they both have in common. So we need to divide them into eighths. Easy peasy lemon squeezy for that one. That one's already divided into eighths. We need to recut this second picture into eighths. Well, this is forced. How are we going to do it? We're going to cut each one of those boxes in half. Now we have 1, 2, 3 eighths and 1, 2 more eighths. 3/8 plus 2/8 is 5/8. Please make sure you have this written down on your board and or on your notebook before you go on. And then, of course, write the answer up here, 5/8.